What does a legend say when no one is watching? Not on the field. Not in front of the cameras. Not during the post-game press conference where every word is carefully measured and every smile is calculated for the world to see. But in the locker room. In that raw, unfiltered moment right after the final out, when the adrenaline is still pumping, when the sweat hasn't dried, when the mask of professionalism finally comes off and the real person underneath is exposed. That's where the story lives. Because on this particular night, Shohei Ohtani didn't just save a baseball game. He didn't just launch his second home run of the night into the California sky or deliver a go-ahead sacrifice fly that shifted the entire momentum of the contest. He did something far more powerful than any of that. He walked into that locker room, found a struggling young pitcher named Roki Sasaki sitting quietly in the corner, and said something so unexpected, so completely unlike what anyone anticipated from the greatest player on the planet, that it brought Sasaki to tears. And when American media finally uncovered what those words were, the baseball world couldn't stop talking. To truly understand what happened in that locker room, you first have to understand what happened on the field. Because this was not a routine night at the ballpark. This was not a comfortable, easy game where the Dodgers cruised to victory and everyone went home satisfied. This was a tense, complicated, emotionally charged contest where the margin for error was razor-thin and the weight on certain shoulders was almost unbearable. Roki Sasaki had taken the mound with enormous expectations sitting on his back like a boulder. The young right-hander, who had made the bold leap from Japanese baseball to the major leagues, was still in that delicate and dangerous phase of his career where every start felt like an audition. Every inning felt like a referendum on whether he truly belonged at this level. The pressure that comes with that kind of scrutiny is something that only those who have lived it can fully describe. And on this night, things were not going his way. The command that had looked so sharp in previous outings was slightly off. The rhythm that makes a pitcher dangerous was disrupted. Runners were reaching base. Runs were crossing the plate. The deficit was growing and the stadium, which had come alive with such excitement, began to feel quieter, heavier, more anxious with every passing inning. Sasaki walked off the mound that night carrying something that no statistic can measure, the particular weight of a young man who believes he has let his team down. That feeling is devastating in baseball. It doesn't matter how talented you are, how many strikeouts you recorded in Japan, how bright your future is supposed to be. In that moment, none of that matters. What matters is the scoreboard, and the scoreboard wasn't telling a kind story. He sat in the dugout. He kept his eyes forward. But anyone who has played this game at a high level knows what was happening inside. This is where Shohei Ohtani reminded the world exactly who he is. Not with a speech. Not with a tactical adjustment or a managerial decision. He reminded the world with the thing he does better than almost any human being who has ever played this game. He hit. The first home run came at exactly the right moment, that precise point in a game where the momentum is hanging in the balance, where one swing can completely rewrite the emotional narrative of an entire night. Ohtani stepped into the batter's box with that familiar stillness he carries, that almost eerie calm that seems completely disconnected from the chaos and pressure surrounding him. The pitch came in. The swing was immediate and decisive. The crack of the bat told the story before anyone's eyes could follow the ball. There is a specific sound that a Shohei Ohtani home run makes, a sound that is somehow different from other home runs, deeper and more authoritative, like a punctuation mark at the end of a very important sentence. The ball traveled. The crowd rose. The scoreboard changed. But Ohtani wasn't finished. Because this is the thing about him that separates him from merely great players. Great players deliver one moment. Ohtani delivers moments in multiples. He seems to understand, on some level that most players never reach, that baseball games have multiple chapters and that a hero's job isn't done after one impressive act. The go-ahead sacrifice fly came later, in a moment that required a completely different kind of excellence. Not the explosive, crowd-lifting, seat-leaving brilliance of the home run. Instead, the quiet, professional, team-first execution of a player who is willing to give himself up for the greater good. He put the ball in play. He drove in the run that mattered most. He gave his team the lead. And somewhere in the dugout, watching all of this unfold, Roki Sasaki felt something shift inside him. Here is what the box score from that night recorded. Shohei Ohtani, 2 home runs, a go-ahead sacrifice fly, multiple RBI, another extraordinary performance added to a career already overflowing with extraordinary performances. The analysts would spend the next 24 hours breaking down his swing mechanics, his pitch recognition, his launch angle, his exit velocity. The highlight reels would be compiled and distributed across every platform. The debate about whether he is the greatest player of his generation, or perhaps any generation, would continue in sports bars and living rooms and comment sections across America and Japan. But none of that tells you what actually mattered about that night. Because the most important moment of Shohei Ohtani's evening didn't happen under the stadium lights. It didn't happen in front of 50,000 fans. It wasn't captured by any of the dozens of cameras positioned around the field to record every movement he makes. It happened in a locker room. In private. Between 2 Japanese players who understand, perhaps better than anyone else in that building, exactly what it means to carry the weight of an entire nation's expectations across an ocean to a foreign league where everything, the language, the culture, the baseball itself, is slightly different from everything you have ever known. That shared understanding is something that cannot be manufactured or explained to someone who hasn't experienced it. It creates a bond that goes beyond teammate. It creates something closer to brotherhood. And Ohtani honored that brotherhood in the most unexpected way imaginable. American media pieced together what happened through multiple sources, teammates who were present, clubhouse personnel who witnessed the exchange, and eventually through Sasaki himself, who opened up in a way that clearly surprised even the journalists asking the questions. The expectation, when Ohtani walked toward Sasaki in that locker room, was that he would offer encouragement. Something positive and forward-looking. Something professional and appropriate. The kind of thing that veteran players say to younger players to keep their confidence intact. Nobody expected what he actually said. Ohtani sat down next to Sasaki. He didn't make a production of it. He didn't gather an audience or make sure anyone was watching. He simply sat down, the way an older brother sits next to a younger sibling, close and without ceremony. And then he said something that stripped away every layer of the superstar, the legend, the 2-time MVP, the highest-paid player in the history of professional sports. He told Sasaki about his own failure. Not in a general way. Not in the vague, comfortable terms that athletes sometimes use to seem relatable without actually exposing anything real. He was specific. He was detailed. He talked about a particular moment in his own career, a night when he had stood on the mound or stepped into the batter's box and felt exactly what Sasaki was feeling in that locker room. That specific, suffocating combination of disappointment and self-doubt and the terrifying question that lives underneath both of those feelings. Am I good enough for this? Ohtani told Sasaki that he had asked himself that question. That the question had not gone away easily. That there had been nights, real nights, specific nights, when the answer he gave himself was not the confident, reassuring answer that the world expected from someone of his talent. And then he told him something else. He told him that those nights were not obstacles on the path to greatness. They were the path. That the players who reach the highest level are not the ones who avoided difficulty and self-doubt. They are the ones who walked directly through it, who sat inside that uncomfortable feeling long enough to understand what it was trying to teach them, and who came out the other side changed. Sasaki, according to those present, said nothing for a long moment. Then his eyes filled with tears. Not tears of sadness. Not tears of embarrassment or defeat. But the specific kind of tears that come when someone says something true to you, something so accurate and so unexpected that your body responds before your mind has time to process what just happened. He hadn't expected Shohei Ohtani, of all people, to say something like that. This is the part that Darvish understood years ago. This is what those who have been around Ohtani up close consistently try to explain to a world that only sees the home runs and the strikeouts and the MVP awards. The numbers are not the point. The numbers are extraordinary, yes. The numbers are historic, yes. But the numbers are simply the visible surface of something much deeper, a character, a philosophy, a way of moving through the world that has been constructed with the same precision and intentionality that Ohtani brings to every aspect of his physical preparation. He doesn't speak carelessly. Every interaction he chooses to have, he chooses deliberately. When he sat down next to Sasaki, that was not an impulse. That was a decision made by a person who understands that his influence extends far beyond what happens between the white lines. He could have celebrated his own performance. On a night when he hit 2 home runs and drove in the go-ahead run, no one would have questioned him for spending the post-game hours enjoying the satisfaction of an individual masterpiece. No one would have looked at him differently. The story the next morning would have been the same regardless. But that's not how Ohtani thinks. For him, the team is not a backdrop for his individual brilliance. The team is the point. The people around him, the young pitchers finding their footing, the veterans managing the end of their careers, the coaches trying to get the best out of everyone, they are not supporting characters in the Shohei Ohtani story. They are the story. And when one of them was sitting alone in a corner of the locker room carrying a weight that Ohtani recognized from his own experience, there was no question about what the right thing to do was. You sit down. You tell the truth. You remind them that the path goes through the difficulty, not around it. In the days following that game, Roki Sasaki spoke to reporters with a noticeably different energy. The tightness that had been visible around his eyes in recent weeks, that particular tension of a young man under pressure, had shifted into something that looked more like resolve. He spoke about the upcoming schedule with a directness and calm that his teammates immediately noticed. He didn't mention the locker room conversation publicly at first. That was private, and he treated it accordingly. But when an American journalist, who had heard pieces of the story from other sources, asked him directly about Ohtani's influence, Sasaki paused for a long moment before answering. He said simply that Ohtani had told him something he needed to hear, at the exact moment he needed to hear it. He said that he had spent so much time studying Ohtani's swing, his mechanics, his preparation routines, his physical conditioning, all the visible, measurable, coachable aspects of what makes him the best player in the world. But he had never thought about the invisible part. The interior work. The specific kind of mental and emotional discipline it takes to sit inside failure, understand it clearly, and then walk back out to the field the next day without carrying the weight of it forward. That, Sasaki said, was what Ohtani had given him in that locker room. Not advice. Not encouragement. Not the words of a superstar condescending to share wisdom with someone beneath him. But the honest account of a fellow human being who had been to the same dark place and found his way through it. That is what brought the tears. There will be more home runs. There will be more sacrifice flies and more dramatic moments and more performances that rewrite the record books and leave analysts searching for new language to describe what they are witnessing. Shohei Ohtani will give the world more reasons to marvel. But the story of that locker room, that quiet, private, unremarkable-looking moment between two men sitting side by side after a baseball game, that story matters in a way that no statistic can capture. Because what Ohtani demonstrated in that moment was not the rarest physical talent on earth. It was something rarer. It was the willingness, at the peak of a legendary career, to set down the armor of invincibility and say to another human being, "I have been where you are. The path goes through it, not around it. Keep going." That is what the greatest players do. Not just on the field, where 50,000 people are watching. But in the locker room, where only one person is.